The council chamber fell silent. Who authorized him to speak? The chair asked, his voice low and sharp. No one answered. At the far end of the table, the unknown diplomat stood alone. His name, Elier Vance, did not appear on any placard. No flag marked his seat. Across from him, the delegates of the Carson Union sat rigid, certain the talks were minutes from collapse. This meeting had been scheduled as a formality, a final gesture before walking away. Elier felt every eye in the room settle on him. A senior negotiator leaned back. Velmora has asked for a truce, he said flatly. State your terms and be done with it. Elier didn't open the folder in front of him. Instead, he looked up. Velmora isn't asking for mercy, he said. We're asking you to acknowledge something you already depend on. Whispers rippled through the chamber. One advisor muttered, he's stalling. Another whispered, end this. Outside the sealed doors, press teams prepared statements announcing the failure of the talks. Analysts stood ready to explain why compromise had been impossible. The council chair raised a hand. You have 1 minute, he said. Choose your words carefully. Elier paused, not from fear, but calculation. He understood what no one else in the room wanted to admit. One sentence, spoken the wrong way, would end everything. Spoken correctly, it would change the balance of power without firing a shot. And what, the chair asked slowly, exactly do you believe we depend on? Elier met his gaze. Your stability, he said. The room went still. If the claim was challenged, the talks would end instantly. If it wasn't, nothing would ever be the same. Elier Vance had learned early that the safest place in any negotiation was the edge of the room. In the foreign ministry of Velmora, junior diplomats like him were expected to listen, record, and disappear. Elier's days were spent summarizing meetings he was never invited to speak in, drafting briefing notes that would be stripped down and reworded by senior hands. His name rarely appeared on final documents. When it did, it sat at the bottom, buried beneath titles that mattered more. When the truce talks with the Carson Union were announced, no one treated them as real. The conflict had dragged on too long, hardened into routine. Publicly, leaders spoke of dialogue and restraint. Privately, the meetings were described as a courtesy, proof that Velmora had tried everything before walking away. Elier saw it in the first draft. The language was careful but loaded, shaped to fail without sounding aggressive. Phrases that sounded cooperative placed responsibility in only one direction. Concessions were framed as admissions. Each clause gave the other side a reason to object without ever saying so outright. During preparatory meetings, senior diplomats spoke openly about the outcome. This isn't about agreement, one advisor said, tapping the table. It's about positioning. Another added, Carson needs to look unreasonable. We just need the paper trail. Elier sat against the wall, notebook open, pen moving. No one asked what he thought. No one expected him to have one. When delegations arrived at the neutral conference complex, a quiet compound designed to feel detached from consequence, the choreography was flawless. Handshakes for cameras, polite smiles that never reached the eyes, flags placed at equal height to imply balance that didn't exist. Elier watched the Carson delegates closely. Their chief negotiator, Marek Solin, barely skimmed the briefing materials. He didn't need to. He already knew where the pressure points were. This was a game both sides had played before. As revisions circulated, Elier noticed contradictions no one mentioned aloud. Clauses that canceled each other out. Commitments that required trust neither side intended to give. The document was airtight in one way only. It ensured collapse. Late one evening, alone in a side office, Elier reread the draft and felt something shift from irritation to clarity. This wasn't incompetence. It was design. The truce talks weren't meant to succeed. They were meant to fail cleanly. Elier closed the folder and sat back, the realization settling heavily. For the first time since joining the ministry, he understood his role perfectly, not as a participant, but as a witness. And that, more than anything, unsettled him. CTA, have you ever stayed quiet at work when you knew something important was wrong? What would you have done? Elier Vance stayed after the lights dimmed. The conference floor emptied in layers, senior delegates first, then advisors, then aides who carried folders thicker than their authority. By the time the cleaners arrived, Elier was alone with the draft agreement, the hum of the ventilation system, and a silence that felt heavier than the day's conversations. He told himself he was only reviewing formatting. That was the excuse he used as he reopened the document on his screen, scrolling past clauses he already knew by heart. His eyes stopped, again, on a phrase buried in the middle of the text, one that had passed through 3 revisions without discussion. Mutual de-escalation shall occur following responsible compliance by all parties. Responsible compliance. To Velmora, it meant restraint by Carson first. To Carson, it meant the opposite. The phrase was elegant, flexible, and lethal. It guaranteed disagreement the moment implementation began. Elliot leaned back, rubbing his eyes. If this goes forward, he murmured to the empty room, they'll reject it before the ink dries. The door creaked open behind him. You're still here, a voice said. Elliot turned. Lena Morick, a mid-level policy advisor, stood in the doorway holding her coat. She glanced at his screen, then back at him. Couldn't sleep? She asked. Something like that. She stepped inside, lowering her voice. You know they expect this to fall apart, right? Elliot nodded. I know. They want Carson to walk away, she continued. Makes tomorrow's statement cleaner. What if they don't? Elliot asked. Lena gave a thin smile. They will. After she left, the room felt smaller. Elliot returned to the sentence. He copied it into a separate window, reading it aloud under his breath. Then he rewrote it, slowly, carefully, testing words the way others tested pressure points. Responsibility shall be measured by actions taken to reduce civilian disruption, regardless of sequence. He stopped typing. That changed everything. No admission of guilt. No forced order of concessions. Just a reframing of responsibility. Not who moved first, but who reduced harm fastest. It gave both sides room to claim initiative without surrendering position. His heart began to race. This isn't my call, he whispered. He imagined the consequences. A reprimand. A quiet removal from the delegation. Years of work ending with a single, career-ending edit. He also imagined the alternative. The talks collapsing exactly as planned. The statements already drafted. The next phase already waiting. Elliot stared at the screen, fingers hovering. No one will thank you, he told himself. He thought of the Carson delegates' tired faces. Of Marek Solin's impatience. Not anger, but resignation. Of a process designed to fail politely. Elliot made the change. He didn't highlight it. Didn't comment. He integrated the sentence cleanly, matching the document's tone, its rhythm. Then he saved the file under the standard naming convention and uploaded it to the shared drive. At 2:14 a.m., the revised draft became official. The next morning, no one mentioned it. Elliot sat at the edge of the room as printed copies were distributed. He watched fingers trace lines of text, saw pauses that hadn't existed the day before. Across the table, Marek Solin looked up, just briefly, his gaze scanning the room before settling nowhere in particular. Elliot lowered his eyes. The document was moving now, beyond him, beyond control. By the time the session adjourned, the revised agreement had been formally circulated to both delegations. There was no going back. CTA. If you were in their position, would you risk your career to change one sentence? Why or why not? The room felt different the moment the session resumed. Elliot noticed it before anyone spoke. Chairs pulled closer to the table, papers aligned instead of scattered. The casual resignation that had filled the room the day before was gone, replaced by something quieter and more dangerous, attention. Marek Solin of the Carson Union adjusted his glasses and began reading from the revised draft. His voice was steady until it wasn't. Responsibility shall be measured by actions taken to reduce civilian disruption. He stopped, looked up, then continued, carefully, regardless of sequence. A murmur rippled through the Carson side of the table. That wasn't there yesterday, one advisor whispered. On the Velmoran side, Deputy Minister Ria Calder leaned forward. It clarifies intent, she said evenly. Nothing more. Solin didn't argue. That was the first surprise. Instead, he turned to his own delegation. If responsibility is defined by outcomes, he said, then initiative becomes a matter of record, not accusation. Elliot felt his pulse spike. They were building on it. A senior Carson negotiator frowned. That interpretation favors Velmora. Calder responded immediately. Only if Velmora acts faster. You're welcome to do the same. Silence followed. Not the brittle kind that preceded collapse, but a calculating one. Elliot kept his eyes on his notes, though his name echoed in his head with every exchange. No one had asked who wrote the sentence. No one wanted to. During the break, voices lowered but didn't soften. "They're repositioning," an aide said near the coffee station. "They're cornered," another replied. "No," Calder said quietly as she passed. "They've been given an exit." Elier stepped aside as Marek Solon approached the window. The older man stared out at the gray skyline, hands clasped behind his back. "You're Velmorin," Solon said without turning. "Yes." "Legal. Advisory." Solon nodded once. "That sentence," he said. "It reframes the entire sequence." Elier said nothing. Solon finally looked at him. "Whoever wrote it understands pressure better than most generals I've dealt with." Then he walked away. By afternoon, the language began reshaping the room. Delegates stopped arguing over who would act first and started discussing how actions would be measured. Timelines appeared. Reporting mechanisms were suggested. The agreement, once ceremonial, began to grow teeth, quiet ones. Elier watched as power shifted without spectacle. Still, fear lingered. If a hardliner objected, the illusion would shatter. If someone demanded attribution, the sentence could be stripped out just as quietly as it was added. But no one did. Instead, the chair announced, "Given today's progress, the final session will proceed as scheduled." A few heads snapped up. "That wasn't on the agenda," someone said. "It is now," the chair replied. As the room emptied again, Lena Morik found Elier near the door. "They're continuing," she said, disbelief edging her voice. "Yes." She studied him. "You know this doesn't end cleanly, right?" Elier nodded. "It never does." She hesitated. "If this matters to you, if these moments matter, don't disappear after today." He met her gaze. Somewhere between the shifting alliances and the unspoken acknowledgments, Elier realized something else had changed. The talks weren't just continuing. They were becoming real. And once that happened, there was no returning to theater. The final session loomed. Whatever happened next would be irreversible. CTA, subscribe, if stories about unseen decisions and quiet influence matter to you. Subscribe, because these moments shape more than we realize. The final session began without ceremony. No cameras were allowed inside. No statements were prepared in advance. The delegates took their seats with the deliberate calm of people who understood the weight of what they were about to endorse or abandon. Elier sat in his usual place along the wall, unseen and unacknowledged. He held no folder this time. There was nothing left to draft. The chair cleared his throat. "We will read the agreement in full," he said. "Any objections will be addressed as they arise." Marek Solon's voice carried through the chamber, steady and precise. Clause after clause passed without interruption. Provisions once meant to provoke resistance now slid by, reframed by the logic of outcomes rather than blame. Then the sentence arrived. "Responsibility shall be measured by actions taken to reduce civilian disruption, regardless of sequence." No one spoke. Elier felt the silence stretch, waiting for it to fracture. A Carson advisor shifted in his seat. Rhea Calder glanced down, then back up, her expression unreadable. The chair scanned the table. "Objections?" he asked. None came. Solon continued reading. The rest of the document followed quickly, as if the room had decided not to linger on the moment that mattered most. When the final page was turned, the chair nodded once. "Then this session concludes," he said. "The agreement will be announced as adopted." Relief moved through the room in restrained exhalations. Handshakes followed, measured, public, careful not to reveal too much. Outside, cameras flashed as leaders spoke of cooperation, restraint, and mutual respect. No one mentioned the sentence. No one explained how close the talks had come to failing. Later, in a quiet corridor, Solon stopped beside Elier. "You won't be named," he said simply. "I didn't expect to be." Solon studied him. "History will credit structure, not authorship." Elier nodded. "That's enough." Solon extended his hand. They shook once, firmly, then parted. As Elier exited the building, the city looked unchanged. Traffic moved. People passed without noticing him. Somewhere inside, a document had been signed that would alter the future of two nations, and his role in it would remain invisible. He didn't feel regret. Only a quiet certainty that sometimes peace arrived not through courage or concession, but through language precise enough to let everyone walk away intact. Elier disappeared into the crowd, already forgotten by the story that would soon be told. CTA. Should the person who made this possible remain invisible or deserve recognition? Share your judgment.